It was the kind of morning that felt like any other. The sun was rising lazily over the horizon, casting a soft glow on the marble floors of the Capitol Hill offices. But for Pam Bondi, a seasoned political strategist, something had changed overnight. There was a buzz in the air, something big was about to break. She had just received a cryptic email that would turn the entire political landscape upside down. The subject line read, "Clarence Thomas' $2 billion plan exposed." Pam clicked the email open with a sense of dread. She had long suspected that Justice Clarence Thomas was involved in more than just judicial work, but this was bigger than she could have imagined. The details in the email were shocking. It described a secretive, multi-billion-dollar scheme that spanned years, with Thomas at its center. The goal? To reshape the political and legal system in ways that could fundamentally shift the balance of power in America. As she read on, Pam's heart raced. She recognized the names of powerful figures involved, senators, donors, even corporations. And the sums of money involved? A staggering $2 billion. Pam knew that this could destroy careers, topple influential figures, and potentially unravel the very foundation of the U.S. Supreme Court itself. With the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on her, Pam made a decision. She had to act fast. She needed to gather her allies, sift through the evidence, and expose Clarence Thomas before it was too late. The stakes were higher than ever. Pam Bondi didn't waste a minute. She called her most trusted allies, people who had connections at the highest levels of government, intelligence, and media. If she was going to bring this massive scheme into the light, she needed all the help she could get. She reached out to her old friend, Derek Hall, a journalist known for his relentless pursuit of truth. He had a reputation for digging into political scandals that others were too afraid to touch. Pam knew Derek would take this seriously. "Pam, you wouldn't believe how deep this rabbit hole goes," Derek said after Pam briefed him on the details in the email. His voice was a mixture of disbelief and determination. "If this is true, we're looking at something bigger than Watergate. If Clarence Thomas is involved in this, it's not just about him, it's about the entire judicial system. And you're right, the $2 billion is just the tip of the iceberg." Pam sat back, rubbing her temples. It was all coming together in her mind. The people Thomas was allegedly involved with weren't just influential, they were powerful enough to manipulate policy, influence elections, and control the very institutions that governed the country. The whole system was in play. But she knew that to expose this, they would need more than just suspicions. They needed hard evidence. Pam and Derek began reaching out to sources. They pored over documents, intercepted conversations, and followed the money trail. It was clear that Clarence Thomas, with the help of a few select insiders, had been orchestrating a series of high-profile legal decisions that favored corporate donors and political allies. In exchange, there were millions, no, billions, being funneled into the right pockets. One name kept coming up again and again, Charles Brown, a notorious billionaire philanthropist with ties to conservative political movements. His donations, disguised as charitable contributions, were tied to a web of political leverage. The more they uncovered, the more it seemed like Brown had used Thomas as a pawn in his greater scheme to rewrite U.S. law. "This is going to be huge," Pam whispered as she scanned a particularly damning document. The truth was out there, and it was darker than she could have imagined. But time was running out. The closer they got to the truth, the more Pam realized that powerful forces would do anything to stop them. Pam knew the time to expose Clarence Thomas's scheme was drawing near. The walls were closing in around her, and every move had to be calculated. One misstep, and the entire operation could be compromised. As she and Derek continued their investigation, they came across an unexpected ally. Sarah West, a former aide to a prominent senator, reached out to Pam with information that could change everything. Sarah had been fired from her position under questionable circumstances, but it turned out she had been privy to meetings where key figures discussed Clarence Thomas's involvement in the $2 billion deal. She had been hesitant to come forward, but now, with the stakes higher than ever, she was ready to speak. Pam arranged a clandestine meeting with Sarah in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. The two women sat in the back corner, their conversation veiled in caution. "You have to understand, Pam, this goes beyond just Clarence Thomas," Sarah said, her voice low. "The plan was always bigger. The goal was to reshape the Supreme Court and shift the power dynamics within Congress. They needed the right decisions, and that's where Thomas came in. Every major case, every controversial ruling, it was all part of the plan." Pam's heart raced. This was the confirmation she needed. It wasn't just about money, it was about control. But Sarah's next words struck her like a thunderclap. They were about to finalize a deal worth $2 billion, something that could secure corporate and political dominance for decades. The deal was supposed to close in a matter of days. "If you don't expose this now, they will finalize it, and it will be too late." Pam's mind raced. If they didn't move quickly, the entire country could be thrust into a new era of corporate-run politics, and the judicial system would be forever tainted. She had to act, and she had to act fast. But with every passing hour, it became clearer that they were being watched. Pam's phone had started buzzing with strange numbers, and she began to notice unmarked cars trailing her wherever she went. Someone knew they were getting close, and they didn't want the truth to come out. "We have to go public, now," Pam said, her voice firm. "The longer we wait, the more power they gain. We expose them in the next 48 hours, or it's over." Derek, who had been quietly listening in the background, nodded in agreement. "I have contacts at major outlets. We can go straight to the press, and with Sarah's testimony, we'll have everything we need." As they made their final plans, Pam couldn't help but wonder, would they be able to outrun the forces that had spent years building this empire of influence? And would the truth, when it came to light, be enough to topple it? Pam's mind raced as she prepared for the biggest gamble of her career. She was about to go public with the most explosive political scandal in decades, and there was no turning back now. The team was ready, the evidence was solid, and Sarah's testimony would be the final blow to bring Clarence Thomas's scheme into the light. But Pam couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the shadows, watching their every move. As the clock ticked down, Pam met with Derek and Sarah one last time in the early hours of the morning. The plan was simple: Derek would contact his most trusted contacts in the media, while Pam would hold an emergency press conference. The two of them would expose everything they had uncovered: Clarence Thomas's involvement, the multi-billion-dollar plan, and the powerful figures who had been manipulating the system from behind the scenes. But Pam knew that exposing this truth wouldn't just bring change, it could also ignite a firestorm that no one could control. There were too many powerful people who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. "We're doing the right thing," Pam said, trying to reassure herself more than anyone else. "This is about protecting the integrity of our system. We have to make them see that." Derek placed a hand on her shoulder, his face grim but determined. "It's too big to ignore. Once it hits the news, there's no going back." But just as they were about to finalize their strategy, the phone rang. Pam answered with a sense of dread, recognizing the number, an anonymous tip, a warning. "This is your final chance, Pam," the voice on the other end of the line said, its tone cold and menacing. "Stop what you're doing. If you don't, there will be consequences, consequences you can't undo. You don't know who you're dealing with." Pam's blood ran cold. She had been expecting threats, but the chilling finality of the voice on the phone sent a shiver down her spine. It was clear now that they weren't just up against Clarence Thomas or his network, they were up against a deep and dangerous system that would do whatever it took to protect its secrets. "I'm not stopping," Pam said firmly. "I'm going to the press, and the truth will come out." She hung up the phone and turned to Derek and Sarah. "This just got even more dangerous. But we can't back down now." The trio set the plan in motion. Derek contacted the major news outlets, securing exclusive interviews and guaranteeing that the story would break across every platform. Pam prepared for the press conference of her life, knowing the world would be watching. It was now or never. The hours passed in a blur of activity, phone calls, and final preparations. And then, at precisely 2 p.m., the world found out the truth. The press conference was nothing short of explosive. Pam stood at the podium, flanked by Derek and Sarah, as cameras flashed. She began to speak, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. Today, we expose the truth behind one of the largest, most dangerous political schemes ever attempted in the history of our country. Justice Clarence Thomas, along with powerful corporate and political forces, has been orchestrating a multi-billion-dollar deal that would fundamentally reshape the power structures within the United States. The deal involves corruption, secrecy, and manipulation, spanning years. And it was all about consolidating political control and influencing the decisions that would shape the future of our nation. The room fell silent as Pam outlined the details of the plan, her words hitting hard like a hammer. She revealed the connections between Thomas, Charles Brown, and several high-profile politicians. She laid bare the money trail, showing how billions of dollars had been funneled into political campaigns and legal decisions, all in exchange for judicial favors. Then, she introduced Sarah West, whose testimony confirmed everything Pam had uncovered. The truth is out, Pam concluded, her voice rising with determination. No longer will our system be manipulated by hidden interests. We will hold the powerful accountable for their actions, and we will restore integrity to our justice system. As the press conference ended, Pam's heart pounded in her chest. This was just the beginning. The forces behind Clarence Thomas's plan would come for her now, of that she was certain. But there was no turning back. The reckoning had begun. The first wave of media coverage hit like a tidal wave, crashing over every news outlet and social media platform in the country. Pam's press conference became the top story across the nation, with pundits, journalists, and political analysts all scrambling to digest the explosive details. The implications were immense, and the shockwaves rippled through every layer of government, from the highest court to the most influential corners of the corporate world. But with the revelation came immediate retaliation. The backlash was swift and brutal. Clarence Thomas's allies wasted no time discrediting Pam and her team. A smear campaign began almost immediately, with anonymous sources planting false stories in the media. Allegations of fabricated evidence, personal attacks on Pam's character, and accusations that she was being manipulated by outside forces flooded the airwaves. It didn't take long before the threats, both direct and subtle, began to escalate. Pam's phone rang late at night with disturbing calls, silent, ominous, or filled with veiled warnings. Someone was watching her every move. And then the more unsettling incidents began. Strange cars parked outside her house, shadowy figures lurking in the background of her meetings. It was clear that she had poked a hornet's nest, and now she was a target. Despite the mounting pressure, Pam refused to back down. She knew that the truth was on her side, and as the weeks passed, more evidence began to surface, reinforcing everything she had exposed. Journalists from around the world dug deeper into the $2 billion plan, uncovering more skeletons from Thomas's past, from questionable rulings to his connections with Charles Brown. Even more shocking were the documents proving that a vast network of political donors had been influencing not only the Supreme Court but key legislative decisions for years. But it wasn't just the media pushing forward, there was now a legal battle on the horizon. The FBI had opened an official investigation into Clarence Thomas, and several high-ranking members of Congress began calling for his impeachment. The pressure was mounting on Thomas, and his defenders were starting to fracture. Even some of his longtime allies in the Senate began distancing themselves from him, sensing that the public's wrath was too great to ignore. In private, Pam could feel the weight of the world on her shoulders. Every step she took felt like a dangerous game of chess, and the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. Yet, amidst the fear and uncertainty, she found herself growing more resolute with each passing day. But then came the breaking point. A bombshell report surfaced, linking Thomas to a covert meeting that had taken place just weeks before the press conference, a meeting with high-profile figures who had been involved in drafting the $2 billion deal. The details were damning, and the evidence was irrefutable. It seemed that everything Pam had exposed was just the beginning. This was bigger than anyone had anticipated. With the FBI now involved and the pressure mounting from all sides, Pam knew it was only a matter of time before the truth fully unraveled. But she couldn't shake the feeling that, even as the walls closed in on Clarence Thomas, the people behind the scheme, those pulling the strings from the shadows, were still out there, watching, waiting, and willing to do whatever it took to protect their empire. The battle was far from over. Pam sat at her desk, staring at the mountain of documents before her. The evidence was undeniable, but she knew that the real war wasn't being fought in the courts or on the news, it was being waged behind the scenes, in the shadows. Clarence Thomas was just the figurehead, the pawn in a much larger game. There were powerful figures, untouchable and hidden, who were pulling the strings, and Pam had only scratched the surface. The pressure was now overwhelming. Her inbox was flooded with messages, some offering support, others threatening retribution. The phone calls kept coming, each more menacing than the last. A voice in her ear, cold and deliberate, "You think you've won, Pam? You've just made yourself a target." Pam had expected the threats, but the real shock came when one of her key sources, a whistleblower within the political system, suddenly disappeared. Mark Thompson, a former aide to a prominent senator, had provided crucial insider information that linked Thomas's actions to a wider conspiracy. But just as Pam was preparing to meet with him to discuss the final pieces of the puzzle, he vanished without a trace. No one knew where he had gone, and the police had no leads. Pam knew that this wasn't just an accident. Mark had been silenced, and it was a clear message: those who dug too deep would pay the price. Her fears were confirmed when Derek called her later that night. He sounded shaken, his voice tight with panic. "Pam, I've got something you need to see," he said. "It's not just about Thomas anymore. They're going after us, trying to shut everything down. There's a whole network of operatives, high-level people with ties to intelligence agencies. It's bigger than we ever realized." Pam's mind raced as Derek sent her the files. As she sifted through them, the enormity of the situation became crystal clear. Thomas was the key to unlocking a sprawling web of corruption and control that extended beyond Washington, D.C. It wasn't just a political scandal, it was a covert operation designed to manipulate and influence not only the legal system but entire global financial markets, pulling in foreign entities, multinational corporations, and shadowy figures with a long history of secrecy. There were encrypted emails, confidential memos, and meeting logs that tied Thomas to a far-reaching network of high-stakes financiers and political players. Names she had never heard of, and some that she recognized all too well, appeared in the documents. Pam realized that what she was dealing with was a network of people who weren't afraid to go to extreme lengths to protect their interests. But just as Pam was piecing everything together, another shock hit. Derek's voice trembled on the phone. "I think they know about you, Pam," he whispered. "I've been getting strange calls. They've been watching me. Someone's coming for us, it's only a matter of time before they make their move." Pam felt a chill run down her spine. She had known that exposing the truth would put her in danger, but now it seemed inevitable. She had pushed all her chips into the middle of the table, and there was no way out. Despite the danger, Pam's resolve only strengthened. She was committed to exposing this corruption, no matter the cost. But she realized that she couldn't do it alone anymore. The stakes were too high, and the forces she was up against were too powerful. Pam called in reinforcements, trusted allies from the intelligence community, people who had experience going after deep state operations. They would help her navigate the minefield of threats, and together, they would take down the entire operation. But as she began coordinating with them, Pam knew that this was a battle that could cost more than just her career, it could cost her life. And as the days went by, the sense of impending doom grew stronger. Whoever was behind this scheme wasn't playing games anymore. They were in full combat mode. Pam's world had become a minefield. Every move she made, every decision, seemed to have consequences she couldn't foresee. As she strategized with her new team of allies, they worked quickly to decipher the information they had collected, but the sense of danger only grew. Whoever was behind this scheme was ruthless, and they weren't just targeting Pam anymore, they were targeting anyone who had come close to the truth. Derek had gone into hiding, and Pam had taken to rotating her locations for meetings. Sarah, her trusted whistleblower, had gone underground after receiving threats that made it clear her life was in danger. It wasn't just about the $2 billion deal anymore, it was about silencing anyone who had the courage to expose it. But Pam couldn't walk away. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Clarence Thomas was just one part of a much larger conspiracy, a conspiracy with tentacles reaching deep into the heart of American politics, multinational corporations, and even foreign governments. And the only way to bring it down was to expose everything, no matter the personal cost. One afternoon, as Pam sat alone in a safe house on the outskirts of Washington, she received a call from an unknown number. It wasn't the first time this had happened, but this time, there was something different in the voice that answered on the other end. "You've made a mistake, Pam," the voice said, its tone eerily calm. "You've pushed too far. You don't understand who you're dealing with." Pam's blood ran cold. She didn't respond right away, but her mind raced, trying to think of what to say or do next. She'd already anticipated threats, but this felt different. The voice didn't sound like the usual threats she had received. "You think you're the first to try and expose us?" The voice continued. "You think your little press conference is going to change anything? The people behind this are too powerful, too entrenched. We control everything, from the highest courts to the financial markets, from the halls of Congress to the backroom deals of the global elite. You're nothing but a blip on the radar." Pam gritted her teeth, her mind racing. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. And I'm not backing down. If you want to silence me, you'll have to do more than just make threats." The line went silent for a moment before the voice spoke again, this time colder. "You're a fool, Pam. You have no idea what you're up against. We can make sure you vanish without a trace, and no one will care. But we're giving you one last chance to walk away. Leave it alone, and you'll be left in peace. Keep digging, and you'll regret it." Pam hung up without responding, her mind swirling. She knew this wasn't just a warning, it was a message. Whoever was behind this was trying to control the narrative, and they were ready to do whatever it took to keep their secrets hidden. But Pam was done being intimidated. She had come too far to turn back now. That night, she met with her team in secret. They were down to a skeleton crew now, just a handful of trusted operatives who had helped her gather evidence, secure witness testimony, and formulate a plan. Together, they crafted their final strategy. They would release everything they had, all at once, in a coordinated leak that would hit the press, the FBI, and the international community. The public had a right to know the truth, and they would take down this network piece by piece. But Pam knew that releasing the documents and recordings would trigger a full-scale assault on her, and possibly everyone involved. She wasn't naive enough to think they would just let her walk away once the truth was exposed. The people behind this had too much at stake. In the final hours before the release, Pam was informed that the FBI had confirmed several of the key individuals linked to the scheme. One of those individuals was Charles Brown, the billionaire philanthropist who had been the financial architect behind much of the operation. He was being targeted for arrest, and his assets were being frozen. But the larger question loomed over everything: would the justice system hold these individuals accountable, or would they simply slither away, protected by the very system they had corrupted? Pam knew this wouldn't be a quick fight, it would be a long and dangerous one. The clock was ticking, and as she stared at the final draft of the documents that would expose the entire network, Pam made a decision. It was time to strike. She hit send. Within seconds, the documents began to spread. News outlets, government agencies, and foreign intelligence services began to receive the information. Within minutes, the first reports began to break. reports that would change everything. And then, everything went black. Pam's phone buzzed with multiple alerts. The first message was from Derek, "They know. It's happening." The next was from Sarah, "Pam, they're coming for you." And the final message, which Pam saw just before everything went quiet, read, "You've made your move, but we're always 2 steps ahead." Pam awoke with a jolt, her head pounding as if a drum had been placed inside her skull. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a split second, she had no idea where she was. The room around her was dimly lit, with no windows and no signs of her usual team or safe houses. She was alone. Her phone buzzed once more, and Pam's heart raced. She fumbled for it, her fingers shaking as she swiped it open. "Pam, are you alive?" It was Derek's message. The desperation in his words was palpable. "They got to us, Pam. Sarah's gone. They're coming for you too." Her breath hitched. No one had known where she was, except her team. The people behind this, the deep state network she had been fighting, had managed to track her down. She had underestimated how far they would go. They knew everything. The stakes had always been high, but now, she was squarely in their sights. Pam struggled to sit up, her mind racing. The leak had been huge, too big to ignore. It had sent shockwaves through the government and the international community. Media outlets were all over the story, broadcasting the corruption, the vast network of influence, the $2 billion scheme tied to Clarence Thomas, and the billionaires like Charles Brown behind it. The evidence Pam had released had exposed a hidden empire, one built on manipulating courts, elections, and the global financial system. But the real question remained, would the powerful forces behind the scheme truly face justice? Pam's gut twisted as she realized the deeper conspiracy, the web of connections that stretched beyond what she had exposed, was still operational. These people weren't just politicians or billionaires, they were part of a system that controlled much more than just Washington. They controlled global trade, national security, and intelligence. They weren't going to be brought down by a single leak, no matter how damning. Pam's phone rang again. It was an encrypted number she recognized, Sarah's old contact. "Pam, you need to get out. Now," the voice on the other end said, urgent and low. "This is bigger than you think. They've been monitoring your moves for months. I'm sending you a route, but you have to leave immediately." Pam's pulse quickened. She didn't know who to trust anymore, but this was her only option. The endgame was in motion. She had exposed the truth to the world, but now, she had to survive long enough to see the consequences unfold. "I've released everything," Pam said, barely able to speak above a whisper. "I've done my part. I just need to know, will anyone pay for this? Or will they bury it all?" There was a long pause, and when the voice returned, it was softer, almost resigned. "You've done what no one else dared to do. The system won't let them silence you for long. But you need to stay hidden. There are still people who will fight to make sure this doesn't disappear. They can't erase what you've done." Pam hung up, grabbing her bag and quickly packing the essentials. As she prepared to leave the dimly lit room, she felt the weight of everything that had happened, the loss of her team, the mounting threats, and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. But one thing was clear, the battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. Minutes later, Pam slipped out of the building, moving quickly and quietly through the streets. Every step felt like it could be her last, but she pushed the fear aside. She had done her part. The truth was out there, and no one could take that away from her. The investigation into Clarence Thomas, Charles Brown, and the vast political and corporate network was far from over. In fact, it was just getting started. Authorities, media outlets, and the public had been shaken to their core by the revelations. Some would try to bury the story, but others, politicians, investigators, and ordinary citizens, would demand answers. Pam Bondi had exposed the rot at the heart of the American system, but in doing so, she had set off a chain reaction that could not be undone. Her name would be remembered, no matter what happened next. As Pam disappeared into the shadows, she could only hope that the truth would eventually lead to justice, and that the people who had sought to control the system would, one day, be held accountable. For now, though, she was a ghost. A witness to a corruption so vast, so ingrained, that it would take years, or perhaps even decades, to truly tear it down. But the seed had been planted. The truth was out there. And it was only a matter of time before it would take root.